Right, so this video pretty much shows you how to restore your trashed leather. Your worn out cracked leather seats. Um, doesn't matter if it's the nastiest leather and on vinyl seats, or if your leather is cracked. This toolkit here should be able to get the job done. So what I've pretty much got here is an airbrush propellant, a leather finish, leather alcohol cleaner, and leather prep. And depending on the number of seats that you want to rework, you might need a couple of more airbrush and propellant. Okay. The leather finish that I have got here is the gloss and the matte. I have also got the FlexiFeel and the cross linker. I'll be showing you the cross linker at the tail end of the video, but essentially what the cross linker does, it toughens the leather finish, greatly improves wet and dry substance resistance, improves the color fastness, increases resistance to perspiration, grease and oil. Okay, while the FlexiFiller, is used to fix heavy cracking. It dries pretty quickly as well. It's used for repairing large areas of cracking. It dries clear, so it's easily colored over. Yeah, but just make sure that you properly sandpaper before you color your car seat. So firstly, I'd need to undo the hose. One end of the hose goes to the opposite side of the trigger, the underside of the opposite side of the trigger, whilst the other end goes into your propellant. If you're not using a propellant, you could also use a compressor. Whatever air source you're using. And if you're using an industrial compressor, you might need an airbrush hose connector 1/8 and BSB male to 1/4 BSB female. Just ask your local tool shop and they should be able to sort you out, okay? So one part of the hose connector goes to the opposite end of the trigger, the underside. So I'll screw that into the underside. And the other end goes into the propellant, okay? So I'll just screw the female part onto the male part of the propellant head or cap. And the other end of the hose goes into the underside, of the gun. So I'll screw that in. And basically, you'd use a pin to troubleshoot the airbrush. And that's because paint might get clogged in the airbrush. So in the nozzles, you might have paint, obstructing, suction pressure and airflow. So, you dip the pin into that hole there. So just basically free up whatever nozzle you've got on the airbrush and use the pin that just about fits into the nozzles of the airbrush. And also make sure that the other two nozzles at right angles to each other are freed up. They're not clogged up with paint. Otherwise you may not the airbrush might underperform. And then we screw in the propellant, which provides pressure for the paint to spray out. Just make sure that the propellant's head is not screwed all the way down, but rather, it is open so that when you put in the propellant, you do not hear a hissing sound and you do not lose pressure from the propellant can. So other bits that you might need for restoring your leather would be Scotch-Brite, cotton wool, sandpaper, gloves, the cross linker, a mixer, and a rag and so on and so forth. And you might also need a cup, for color matching, to match your car leather seats. But I don't need that because I cut a strip off of the leather, sent it to the company, and they just matched the color. That saves me time. And basically, this is your cross linker, which helps toughen the leather finish. I'll show you how to use it towards the tail end of the video. And I would suggest that you get a palette knife. But if you want to use this spatula, I'll show you how to use it using the FlexiFeel. But it doesn't give a proper finish. I'd rather you use the palette knife to get the FlexiFeel on. And also, if you haven't got your leather alcohol cleaner, you can also use isopropyl alcohol, 99.9% or 1997 or whatever you've got, in place of the leather alcohol cleaner. And also, you're going to need a sandpaper. Pretty much, we're going to be using maybe the 1200 and the 600. A higher grit number essentially, it's equivalent to a finer abrasive. which essentially means that it creates a smoother surface finish, whilst the lower grit numbers represent a coarser abrasive, that scrapes off materials and much more quicker. And lastly, we're also going to need, carbon paper to mask the car around to prevent paint from, spilling on certain places that we do not want the paint to get onto, like the MMI control console or the dashboard. And lastly, we might also need some cover plastic bags to mask the seat. So whatever, just get anything that's quite handy and mask off certain areas that you do not want the paint to get onto. So let's get on. So let's get onto the leather car seat. So you can see here we've got some creases, some cracks, on the seat that I'd love to restore. It's just maybe caused by ultraviolet light or wear and tear. Um, you know, Contamination from the cleaning products and stuff has just gotten deep into the seats and stuff. Providing some form of discoloration. So I'll be pretty much trying to restore this leather, with the same color, and trying to cover up them creases, just make the chair look, pretty brand new. And in order to save myself time, in trying to match the color, I just cut off a piece of leather underneath the seat in a place that's not evident or conspicuous, and sent that to the kit or color supplier. And I've got my colorant, in exactly the same match, that I've got on here on the seat, and you can see some slight discoloration, on the seat. So we'll be getting all of that off with alcohol, either the leather prep alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. And you can also see some scratches that I have got on the seat as well. I'm going to work them through. And you can also see that I have masked off the belt, the headrest, the dashboard, the MMI console and whatnot. Just places that you don't want the paint overspray and spilling on. Okay. So basically, I'm going to work, all of the seats. I'm just doing a visual inspection of all of the seats first to find out where the cracks and scratches are. Then subsequently hoover the dirt off the seats, because you don't want to be working with dirt or contamination or deposits on your seats. So just first, get rid of forward or foreign object debris, on the seats first. So the second stage would be to pretty much mask off other areas, of the cars. So I've used, the carbon paper, and 3M tapes or whatever, masking tape to mask the belt, the back seat, where I do not want the oversprays to be, and, the headrest and dash and whatnot. So I'm pretty much restoring all of the car seats, and the armrest. And, as with any painting job, the prep or preparation is really very important before you start doing any sort of paint job. So I've taken time, to mask off areas that I do not want the overspray on. So as you can see, the seat belts, the steering, the MMI console, the door handles, even down to the back seat. I've pretty much masked every area. And as you can see, the driver's seat looks quite gross, but it's not really gross. The leather is still intact. It's just the paint job that needs uplifting. A touch. The leather is quite durable. Okay. And so we'll be sorting it out with the tools that we showed earlier in the video. And there you can see some more, cracks or creases, So as with any paint job, you should wear the appropriate safety features, and your face masking would come in handy when restoring the leather. So first, I'd be using the alcohol cleaner, the leather alcohol cleaner, or the isopropyl alcohol. It is an essential part of the preparation. It helps you to remove grease and grime, oils, waxes, silicones, and improves the adhesion of coatings. We've got all sorts of greases and grime and contaminants from cleaning products, from our skin, and from our clothing, and just from natural wear and tear. You might eat, spill that on the leather. All of that gets into the leather, because leather is porous. and because it's porous, this contaminant could seep through the surface. So I get the alcohol cleaner on the pad and just try to wipe it off. Just kind of buff it and keep rubbing, and you can see that the pad, you know, um, gets dirty. So because I've used the alcohol prep cleaner, it didn't come off. I had to use like a cloth, and also utilize the isopropyl alcohol, which is 99% strong, to get off the discoloration that has seeped through the seat, and you can see it started to come off. So I suppose the strength of the isopropyl alcohol is stronger. So I put more isopropyl alcohol on the clean cloth, or the used rack cloth, and get some more of the discoloration off the seat. And you can see the pads picking up dirt, from the seat. It's grime and dirt and contaminants from the top of the seat. And if you've got sensitive skin, always use gloves when you're using the alcohol cleaner or the leather prep. So this is pretty strong. We're going to use some leather prep to increase the bonding properties of the colorant. So this step of the process is an essential part of the prep process. It removes oils and waxes from the leather surface. It's extremely efficient at doing this. It removes original coatings to ensure good adhesion, and can help to soften the leather by removing old, dried out coatings. And so using the cloth takes up a lot of the leather prep. So I, sometimes substitute it with like a cotton wool, because with the cotton wool there's much more spread, um, than using the cloth. So I'd use the cotton wool and the cloth interchangeably, but you can use the cloth, throughout the whole process if you want. Okay, that's absolutely fine. So I've pretty much prepped, all of the seats, and you can see it looks, well prepped. The masking is done, the alcohol prep and the leather prep, have been utilized on all of the seats. And the next step would be to perform another visual inspection, just to make sure that you've got the leather prep everywhere and the isopropyl alcohol. So I found out that I didn't reach some places, at the back seat. So I'm applying more isopropyl alcohol or the leather prep in areas where I feel they need it. And you just start to see some of the contaminants, grime, grease, and dirt, start to come off. Some coating come off, and that's fine. So you can see that I have adequately, prepped, the leather. And the next step would be to cover up them creases, them cracks and scratches, with Flexifield sandpaper, prior to applying the colorant. And so prior to applying the Flexifiller, we'd need to take out, all of the foreign object debris, like, loose bits of rags, cotton wool, paper, or whatever you've got on the seats. You can vacuum if you want, or you can dust it off with a rag, but just vacuum just to make sure that you haven't got any bits lying around, okay? You can also use like a tack cloth, to get off, the debris. So the next step of the process would be to apply the leather flexi-feel, and to sandpaper with like a 1200 grit sandpaper or 600 grit sandpaper. So I've got like a black spatula here, and I'm also using like a wooden stick to first apply the flexi-feel, then sort of like smoothing it with, the black spatula. I would suggest that the black spatula isn't ideal in this situation, and I'll show you why. Because it leaves lines, and so when you spray the colorant over, you get to see lines. So I'll say use a palette knife, but I'll use a palette knife subsequently. But first, I'll show you what I mean here. And because you'd have to work at awkward angles, this type of spatula for me isn't, really ideal. It's good for your body work and whatnot, but here, it sort of like scrapes off most of the flexi and leaves lines behind, but the palette knife, provides more of an even distribution, and it's first a downward force before a smoothing force, whereas this is like more of a downward force and a scraping force, okay, being applied. And you only just need about a thin film of the flexi feel, on the leather, and just take care that you're not overly applying the flexi feel over the threading, If you have, just find a way to wipe it off before the FlexiFeel solidifies. Otherwise, when it dries off, you might find more of the FlexiFeel around the threading, and it's more difficult to sandpaper over there. And you can see what I mean when you're using the spatula. There's always that tiny bit of line, that's always left behind once you stroke it through. And when you try to smoothen it, it leaves another line, and you don't want that to dry. I'm happy with this section. That's quite smooth, but if you look very closely on the edge, you keep finding lines here, and that's what I'm trying to smoothen out. So subsequently I'll use a palette knife to smoothen it out a lot better. Okay. So I'll take it a lot closer so you can see the lines, when I'm using the black spatula, you can see it here. So whichever way you make the application, because of the pressure, you're always going to keep getting lines. And when that dries out, you don't want to be sandpapering a lot of lines, do you? So subsequently, I will use the palette knife to distribute the FlexiFeel more evenly. Just note that you only need a very thin, small film. You don't need, excessive FlexiFeels in there. If you've got that, scrape it off. Um, if you put too much FlexiFeel, you might find out that it turns flaky, and it wouldn't stick on to leather. So you need a very thin film. Then afterwards, you dry it up. You can still see some of the lines that I had from the spatula in there. So I just need to sandpaper the lines down so that when I spray over, the lines are not evident. Okay, but if you can, during the smoothing process, just make sure that you're smoothing the lines out. But I can take the risk from here. I'll still sandpaper it out, and I should be good to go. Then afterwards, use a hairdryer to dry out the FlexiFeel. You might want to use a heat gun, but just be careful, that you don't set the temperature on the heat gun too high, to an extent where it begins to melt the leather. I just find, the hairdryer a lot more safer to use. And it's very important that that the FlexiFeel dries properly. We're just speeding up the drying up process, with the heat gun, with 1 or 2 or 3 runs over the FlexiFeel, but just make sure that it dries properly. And if it's summer, a lot luckier. You get the FlexiFeel drying a lot faster. You can start with a 600 grit sandpaper, which is more coarse, but I find out that my film is quite thin, so I'd use the 1200 sandpaper to sand off the FlexiFeel. But by all means, use a lower grit to sandpaper the leather before stepping up to the 1200. Okay, for a super fine finish. The 1200 may not be able to get the lines off, but I'll subsequently run down some of the lines with maybe 600. But in my case, I'm able to get off the lines with a 1200. So it's just a bit of trial and error. Test in a particular area first before you just run it through the whole leather. So I've pretty much applied the FlexiFeel and dried it off, and I'm just checking for smoothness on the seats, and trying to sandpaper lines down so that when I spray coat, I get an even finish. I just fill it out with my bare hands and visually inspect, the FlexiFeel. But if you're doing it with the palette knife from the get go, you can get it to be a lot more smoother. Okay. So from here onwards, I'm going to take off the deposits or residue from the sandpapering, off with a tack cloth. If you can also use your Hoover, or whatever tool you've got. You can use it, but I kind of use the tack cloth, to get deposits or residues, off tight spots or areas, or awkward angles where the Hoover cannot reach. And also it's quite sticky, so I'm pretty sure that majority of the deposits would come off with a tack cloth. Then subsequently I could use a Hoover to get rid of food or foreign object debris. So for the very first base coat, I've pretty much used an application pad with a colorant, on the leather car seat. You can get the paint code for your Audi, in the trunk of the car or the car boot, where you keep your spare tire. The paintwork, for this Audi is a metallic silver, but it doesn't mean that in all vehicles that the corresponding body work matches the leather seat color. In this case, I've had to get a piece of the leather, and send it off for a color match. And so when you apply the first base coat, you're not going to get, a very even finish, but it's just to make sure that, the colorant, sips into the seat properly. And so the second stage would be to fill in the empty bottle of the airspray or the airbrush and, spray the car seat with the colorant. The colorant matches the color, and the bottle was pretty sufficient for all of them seats, all of them 5 seats. And I had like 3 runs or 3 sprays on each seat, so it works perfectly fine. So from here onwards, I'll be applying the airbrush colorant, in a rhythmic sweeping movement, over the seat. And you can get more propellant, from your local car shop, if your original propellant is finished. And if your spray can freezes up, dip the propellant in, water in such a way whereby the can displaces, the water to 1/4 of its length. So what I'm trying to say is don't fill the bucket up with water and dip your propellant can in. You'd have splashes of spray everywhere. You just want the warm water to be able to prevent the propellant from freezing. And if the can drops in the bucket, make sure you stand up the can. You don't want to have rapid bursts of colorant, coming out from your airbrush. And just make sure that you get enough propellant, say about 2 propellants per car seat. The last thing you would want is to be stuck halfway through the job just because you've run out of propellant, especially when you've got other things to worry about like the weather. Especially if you need to sort out the repair as quickly as possible so that you can use your car for commute. So it's important that you get, a considerable amount of cans or propellant cans available for use, okay? Subsequently, the a piece of leather that was used in matching up the collar and for the car seat from, the supplier, I'd use that to provide, the texture marking or the grain marking on the leather seat. So I'm using a tiny piece of material or leather to sort of like provide like the same kind of finish, that came with the leather. So if you just put the flexi-feel on and you spray over the flexi-feel, it's just going to be smooth. But this leather has got a certain grain to it, and that's why I'm applying, the piece of leather, and transferring the grain from this piece of leather onto the parts where I applied, the flexi-feel. But you need to do this before the flexi-feel dries off, okay? And so once you've applied, the textured finish, transferring the grain from the little bit here, onto the leather seat, then you can, apply the colorant or the base coat, whatever, how many runs you want. I find three runs or 3 sprays on each seat to be sufficient enough, okay? And instead of multiple strokes with a small, bit of the cut leather, you can get, a larger sample of the cut leather and then transfer the grain texture onto the leather just like I've done here, and gently take it off the leather seat to transfer the grain or the texture. And as opposed to dapping, the small cut leather multiple times, this will just save you time, okay? And don't wait for the flexi feel to be overly dried, just while it's still, moist and soft, just transfer the grain as quickly as possible, let it dry, then sandpaper it off, okay? The exact color of the leather wouldn't matter here because you're transferring the grain, you're not transferring any color, okay? So by any means, use any leather as long as it's got the same grain size or texture, okay? This is just for illustration purposes. In a real life scenario, you wouldn't be transferring the texture grain onto a tabletop. You will be transferring this onto an actual leather or your car leather seat. Why is transferring the grain important? Transferring the texture is important because if you just apply the flexi-feel, you're just going to have a smooth surface, and that will be pretty evident, that you've got some parts that are smooth and some parts that have got the texture, and that's not what you want, okay? And if you look closely, you can see some form of grain transfer onto the flexi-feel. And just take care that when you're sandpapering, you don't sandpaper all of the grain out too as well, okay? And so from here onwards, dry with an air dryer, sandpaper, and then, spray the seats with your base coat colorant color. And here I'll be using the 1200, bit sandpaper. Just, ensure that you're basically transferring the grain from, your textured bit finish onto the leather, and you should be fine. Then, basically spray the seats with the colorant. And for more control of the airbrush, you hold the gun or the trigger with your index finger. That provides more control when spraying rhythmically, or when you're sweeping the spray onto the seat. So we're pretty much done applying the base coat, and it's already looking brilliant, almost looking brand new. And so the next step would be to apply the finish, and first would apply the gloss first, even if we're looking for a matte finish. And so basically, to the gloss finish, we would apply the cross linker to 1/8 of the colorant, that would be in the bottle. So we'd top up the bottle with cross linker, basically just filling 1/8 of the bottle, 1/8 of the bottle up with the cross linker, and the remainder of the bottle with the gloss leather finish. So basically the ratio is 1:8, 1:8 for the cross linker and 7:8 for the gloss finish. The finished mixtures are not as thick as the colorants, so just make sure that you're spraying slightly further away from the seat, okay? And like I said previously, the aim is to achieve a matte finish. So, even if you're trying to achieve a matte finish and you've sprayed with gloss, then, subsequently you can repeat the same process. Fill in 1/8 cross link up with the matte finish, and, spray your seat, and that should get the sheen look off the seat. And that's about it really. It's already looking brilliant. And also you can just about see here, where I've applied, the matte finish with the cross linker, and you can see the sheen look has disappeared. This is exactly how I want it. And as it dries off, it even gets, better. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, helps the channel grow. Thank you for your time, thank you for listening. Hopefully catch up with you soon as I've got more upcoming videos. Goodbye.